A century club to start our season, a little bit of mid-strolling, and now another big bass bonanza at Fork. That and more on episode 166 of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Ronnie Moore. My co-host, like always, Kyle Jessie, is on the road, sitting in his car outside of Lake Fork. I guess waiting to check into the hotel, Kyle, before you get settled in for the Elite this week. But from Toledo to Fork, couldn't have probably started off with two better big fish places where we get to see a little bit of weather impact, but we'll get into that and more in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, to get a century belt right off the bat, at Toledo Bend was really awesome. I think that you guys got to see it on live probably more than I did on the water, but the transition of fish wanting to push shallow. I mean, it was super warm, for a handful of days in a row there. You had your full moon, things of that nature. And then from Toledo Bend to Fork, I mean, you're talking about a lot of warm weather between, Sunday and then potentially to Thursday. We'll get more into that, of course. Looks like we might have some changing conditions, but um, I assume the fish will be on the move. It's something that we all talked about, at Toledo Bend, and I think we'll see more of that at Lake Fork for sure.
We'll talk about all of our theories on fish heading shallow and what pressure has done to them, and really, I guess the impact of the moon and different things that we've seen over the years. But we always, hey, Kyle, I want to start off with a reminder that we always talk about in Arkansas is we could get warm weather. We've had warm weather here in Arkansas the last few days. No matter how warm it gets, we always are like, uh-oh, they could be spawning soon. We got a moon coming up, and they don't ever do it in Arkansas until like April, steady. Like it's like maybe you see one, but there's not ever like a full wave that have truly moved up in Arkansas until April. But we know South Texas, South Louisiana is a totally different deal. So, were you shocked out on the water? Let's just get to Toledo Bend and recap that real quick. But were you shocked on the water that you didn't get to cover more guys shallow? It seemed like if any fish did push shallow during the event or before the event, it was just all the males. Like there was, it was very rarely did we see a big one get caught up shallow. Very rarely that we saw people spending their time doing it. And I don't know if that's because they did it in practice and it just wasn't going on. But it certainly wasn't going on even on Championship Sunday when you got two or three guys who have no shot to win it really. They're experimenting and trying it, but it still didn't seem like it was doing its thing.
It was surprising to me based on the fact that, during media day on Wednesday and talking to anglers, it sounded like that was going to be more of a factor. I think that it was a little surprising to me to hear how many guys, a day before the tournament were talking about how the shallow bite was going to play. If you'd asked me 3 weeks, a month ago, if I'd have been surprised that less guys were fishing the bank, I'd have probably said no, because, I would have expected February, Toledo Bend, potential cold weather, water temperature still dipping down. I would have expected more fish to be off the banks, but with the warming weather, the full moon, everything that we had, despite still being the end of February, and then additionally, what you and I had talked about on the previous podcast with Daryl Gleason mentioning that if certain things lined up, that there would be guys really catch them on the bank and even spawning. Well, it was a little shocking that of those fish that were moving up, some of the bigger females were not. You mentioned Washita and that part of the country. A lot of places, including Central Arkansas, like we're talking about, some of the biggest fish in the lake pull up first. I mean, it almost always happens that way because, like you said, guys want to rush the spawn so much a lot of times to where, they'll catch a 10 pounder or whatever it may be. And it's like, oh, they're spawning, they're spawning. Well, some of the biggest fish in the lake pull up, spawn quickly and move back out. But that doesn't mean that the majority of the population is spawning. So, it was a little surprising that more guys didn't have sustained success doing that. And I guess I was even more surprised, despite seeing guys like Chris Johnston, Jordan Lee, some of those guys go to the bank later in the tournament. Um, I don't know. It's one of those things. I think if you have your pattern pretty well dialed in, doing something else, whether it may be fishing grass off the bank, live scope and timber, whatever it may be, it's hard to leave that in hopes to find fish shallow. It's surprising to me that maybe, a guy or two didn't make it to the final day that were steadily catching more fish up shallow and then we're able to, blast them on the final day. I think that was kind of what a lot of guys were looking for. But I guess that, just didn't pan out. I guess enough fish were still off the bank and coming to the bank. And, those guys that intercepted them on the creek channels and the kind of secondary stuff, the pre-spawn, typical pre-spawn areas were the guys that obviously were able to have the most success.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've gone to Washita and caught 15 to 25 fish on a buzz bait with 58-degree water. And I'm like, I haven't seen one on the bed yet, but yet they're active enough to bite a buzz bait. Did I miss a wave or has the wave not gotten there yet? And so it's interesting to see Toledo. So give us the perspective. We knew Housen Creek, 6 Mile Creek. We know those, Pirates Cove and the Louisiana side. We knew that those areas were going to be factors. That's why we labeled them on the map, that those are the hot spots. I learned after covering one or two Toledo events that like every college event, I just would drive to the mouth of Housen and start taking photos of people, and I'd eventually find someone in the running after day one throughout my day. And so we knew those places would factor, but break down what it looked like at close to full pool out there with the timber, and then where you started to kind of line out. You kind of got 4 days of practice at Toledo watching the tournament. You kind of know, like, were these fish moving farther back in the creeks, closer on those flats towards the bank, or were they still really tight to those creek channel edges?
It seemed like most guys that were having success. So my perspective is a little tainted, I guess, if you want to call it that, because I did stay in Housen for all 4 days. I mean, the majority of the top 10, whether it be, day 2, 3, 4, whatever day it was fishing in Housen. And to be honest, like even, eliminating Housen's a big area, eliminating probably 85% of it. I mean, the guys that really had success, you look at Luke Palmer, Koya, um,
Schlapper.
Corey Johnston, yeah, Pat Schlapper, Alex Wetherell, um, Cooper was in there, Cooper Gallant. I mean, there was the majority of the top 10 was fishing basically within sight of where, all those guys I just named were fishing. So, my perspective is a little different. Um, However, yeah, it seemed like one of the flats, that Pat and Luke were fishing a lot. Both of them were fishing the drop off kind of into the creek channel a lot early on in the tournament. And it seemed like that last day, neither of those guys had excellent days, of course, but it seemed like a lot of their better bites were coming shallower up on the flat. So to say that those fish had moved, all the way back wouldn't be accurate, but to say that they had moved from deeper water to shallower water, certainly was the case. So, um, I'd like to see what it's like today, 2 days after the tournament with super warm weather 2 days in a row. I would have to think, more of those fish push back there because even Pat on the last day went and fished shallow, for a decent little while. And we stayed with him while he was doing that. And he was able to see fish on beds and see fish back there and catch a few little ones. But, it was just hard for him to get that bigger bite the final day.
Yeah, it was odd. We thought, Zona said it on live, like the baseline, his floor was like 18 pounds, so it was like you're gonna just need the worst day you've had all week, 22, to break 100. If he just even catches 18, he's gonna force him to catch 24. Like it's still a possibility, things like that. And it really just didn't happen for him. But Alex Wetherell, he started to rise up the leaderboard late in the tournament and made the final day. Um, he talked about on live his waypoint management. Waypoints seem like a thing of the past because they'd mark structure, or you maybe mark some offshore schools that are on a hard spot, on the Tennessee River or whatever. But Wetherell said he would, every time he'd catch a fish, he would mark a waypoint, and each day it would be a different color so that he could see how Thursday went, Friday went, Saturday, like where, if his bites were, when you're head down or you're just trolling around, where these fish might be moving within the creek channel, up on the flats, like you said. And so, and then obviously adjacent to the grass, there was a good amount of hydrilla in some of those areas. And so to see they were on this part of the grass and now they're on this end of the grass, things like that, or how many places replenish. So, uh, give me a perspective of, because on live we knew everyone on the map was close, but was it bumping boats? Did everybody have their own little real estate? If Palmer and Schlapper were close, did they ever Venn diagram, spots over and get around each other or swap sides, or how did that manage for, eight of the top 10?
Of all those guys I named, at pretty much any given time, they were all within sight of each other. The only two that you could use the Venn diagram, example for would be Pat and Luke. They both fished um, a more defined area, I guess, than the other guys were. Well, as far as like a specific area that the other guys weren't, I should say. Um, but it seemed like for the majority of the tournament, Pat was fishing a little bit deeper. He was fishing closer to the creek channel. And then Luke was fishing, you saw him throwing a jerk bait, doing a lot of those things, a little bit closer to the flat. So those two, definitely fished over some of the same areas that they had fished, that the other had fished, I should say. But, for the most part, it was not like bumping boats by any means. I mean, there was it seemed like from my perspective, it seemed like there was five or six hot spots, in that general area. And a couple of the guys were rotating in and out. Obviously, like you mentioned, Alex was not staying put too long. He would run to some of the other places and then come back and things of that nature. But Pat specifically was fishing basically one, I don't know, I want to call it like 200 yards maybe stretch back and forth, kind of, teetering on the line of the channel and where the timber meets the flat with the grass. And obviously there was a lot of fish there. The last day was clearly a struggle, but for the most part, they all kind of had their own little specific areas. And having got to cover that area for 4 days, it was not like there was any, funny business going on where one guy was fishing an area and then the next day a guy that saw him catch them there. Like they all stayed in their general areas. Like, and it worked out well because I don't think that for the most part they were looking to venture out of their specific spots. So I think it's from my perspective, it seemed to work out for all the guys.
I'm waiting for the day on live where we see a fish suspending by a piece of timber and we see a bait drop down to him, and then we see another bait from like another direction. And we see multiple baits on the same screen going for the fish because people are fishing that close. But like we said, that wasn't necessarily the deal at Toledo. Give me your vibe because we're shallow water guys. By heart. Zona, Davey, they spoke about it, at lengths on live about how the fishing is changing these days and how it's not what you'd think. And it's somewhat disappointing that there wasn't diversity. And who would have ever imagined that we'd come to Toledo in February and everybody would be doing the same thing? Um, can you gauge or give me a vibe, backstage behind the tanks of how the anglers were? Because we saw each other on Wednesday, and there was some, we did the whole boat inspection and photos and things, and guys would make their comments here and there. But what's the overall vibe about how anglers are having to catch fish if they want to compete and win? At least last week at Toledo Bend, people can think it's the end of the world for Fork, Grand Lake, Harris Chain, St. John's going forward on the schedule, but we know that there will be times that it won't be completely dominated by this. At least we believe that. Until we see otherwise, we're not sure. We didn't think it would be at Toledo with it getting warmer. So what was the I guess the mood of just the overall field and people there?
Yeah, I don't want to overreact too harshly one way or the other, which I think is important for everybody probably to do, although that's not exactly the popular decision from most. Um, I think that when you talk about a place like Toledo Bend, I don't think there was anybody in their right mind that thought, forward facing sonar was not going to be a factor. I think that, we know the power of it. We know where it excels. We know how guys can use it to be successful. Well, it wasn't surprising to me at all to see the guys were, obviously having such success with it at Toledo Bend. Now, the general vibe, I definitely get the sense that, more and more guys are starting to get frustrated with it. But I think that just comes with a lot of things. I think that, when you see guys have success with it, that are really good with it, um, you know, it might be frustrating to watch. It might be frustrating to be a part of for sure, as an angler. But at the same at the same rate, like for the most part, these guys all have the technology. I mean, like the only ones that don't are the ones that consciously choose not to. So, um,
Which is
I don't know.
single digit guys.
Right, right.
Even
I mean,
even the guys who want to be shallow have one. They may not have 6 units. They have a unit
certainly.
for it. It's on the trolling motor because on the Elite Series you fish for a living. if you don't have it and you need it at noon on day two of an event, you can't go get it installed, during the day. You better have it when you start. So yeah, I know it's split, and I know the viewership, I wouldn't even say split 50-50, but I think that the naysayers or the negative Nancy's are louder than the people learning. And I truly learned. We got to see Robert G's, live scope all week. We got to see some 360 at times from guys. And it was great seeing it and learning it. And I think that that's something we're going to get better at the production side of it, is showing that and lining it up as a teaching method. And not as a magical, wave your wand and boom, you catch them. But yeah, and I know that there's a lot of disappointed, frustrated anglers that they don't recognize the sport they're in right now. But I also do know we've had those changes throughout society and time, going from topo maps to getting GPS, or nothing to having a flasher, or flashers to side imaging. And who would have ever thought that in the peak 2010s that somebody would side scan all 3 days of practice looking for schools of fish and would never make a cast on any of them? But that's the way that we were, like, during that season of time in the heyday of the Tennessee River. That's what you did. So, and now it's just transitioning to this technology. So obviously there's concerns all around, but yeah, I know it's could be a really fun atmosphere at elite events, but I know there's a lot of serious conversations and frustrations that are vented out as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like things evolve, right? I mean, you and I have talked about this. Seems like no matter what we're talking about, forward facing gets brought up to some degree, varying levels, but um every everything, music, sports, I mean, everything you can think of for the most part evolves. And I can understand fully that some anglers that the guys that have been doing this for a long time might not like, or might not be in love with the transition that we're seeing. But I think that there's a lot of factors, and I think that, again, rather than overreacting, like, you have to realize, like, when you go to Toledo Bend in February and, like, potentially March, I mean, excuse me, Fork in February, March, like, it's a typical pre-spawn time of the year. Like, there's fish off the bank. Like, the technology is going to be a factor, certainly. Um, you know, I just don't know. It's hard to compare to anything because it is so unique. I'm not trying to hide that at all. I mean, obviously, like, if you look at all the other advancements in technology, whether it be power poles, certain transducers, side scan, 360, whatever it may be, really none of them have made as big of an impact as forward facing sonar has. So I'm not trying to downplay that it's just another thing that's come along, because it is I mean, clear as day. If you watch Bassmaster Live, or if you've fished in a boat with live scope, like, you see the difference. Like, it's like, quite literally, you see the difference in
takes
what's
takes
going
a lot of
on.
questions out.
Certainly, certainly. So I mean, uh I agree 1000% with the guys that say, it's not just a magic wand. It's not just you just turn it on and you start catching them, because you certainly don't. Like, I've fished with it enough to know, like, oh, more often than not, it just makes you realize how many fish you're not catching. So it's just such a weird time in that regards, and hopefully, things will start kind of evening out, and once we get further along in the schedule, things will change up a bit. But it is certainly a very powerful tool.
I gotta look back because I was texting with Kenta Kamira on Sunday after the tournament, and where is it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Here it is. He said we were talking about it, and he said that they have scope haters in Japan as well,
Interest.
and so that Kiyoya may have kept it more on the down low what he was doing in Japan. Um, and they have a big fishing community there. But if you see something in an Elite Series event on FS1 and Bassmaster.com, people know what it is within the hour. And so when you can't hide stuff nearly as much. But they said they have scope haters in Japan, got to keep it quiet at times. And then he said, I get really excited to know why we used to catch them so randomly on a red trap. And that's what it would have been. This tournament would have been a 74 to 78 pound win, just like it was in April and 17 when John Murray wins. Like, Does Toledo have the fish for a Century Club? 100%. We saw it. They have plenty of 5 and 6 pounders to do it. Do those fish go to the bank as much? Probably a lot less than other lakes because of how many flats and turns and channels and timber. And that place was the one that was really revealed before Fork in the fall for the elites. Cody Huff won to a college event, a Toyota series at Toledo in January, February, dropping a little Hopkins spoon, in the timber and catching fish like that. And so I think we knew they lived out there, but when they don't make a push to the bank, you're going to see a 70-pound, 75-pound tournament. Not that that's bad. It's just, I think it's a unique body of water that's much different than maybe a Fork. Fork is so small compared to it. They can't all live offshore. There's not enough water for them to stack up, or there's just going to be mega school after mega school after mega school. They've got to go places because it's only, it's a eighth of the size of Toledo. Toledo is massive. And so
Right.
I wonder how Fork will be this week, but make no bones about it. The name of the game on the Bassmaster Elite Series is the goal is to catch more fish and to catch bigger fish, and it's driving some winning weights up. And so if you choose to not use it stubbornly to just fish your desired way, everyone's always done that. We've talked about that. There are those guys who flip a jig and they need to pick up a shaky head and catch one more fish to fill their limit out, and they stuck with the jig all day and they only brought in four. And we're like, why didn't you change up? Now we're seeing guys stick with a jig all day, and instead of messing with the live scope, they stick to their guns, and then they're in 75th. Just to play devil's advocate, we're in an odd spot because they are now praised for doing that. And that was my only disappointing thing that I saw out of the first event was, and this is just me not calling anyone out specifically, but just the heroes of the sport, the veterans of the sport, those who have been here maybe since the Elite Series started, or they've been fishing since 2000, 1995, whatever it is. My heroes of the sport that I've been able to cover used to preach to me and you, Kyle, when we were kids. You'd watch you never give up. You fish hard to the last second. You work harder than everyone else. You put in your time and you never settle for zero. You always are trying to figure it out. You're trying to adapt and survive. Be versatile. Mix this into your game plan, all that stuff. I saw a lot of my heroes choose to be one trick ponies, and they went home and they finished 80th place at Toledo. It's just weird to see fans rooting that on. I get the pureness of it, but I was disappointed to see guys who had always told me to like never stop trying new things, always learn and adapt, catch more fish, figure it out, rest on, their soapbox and be okay with missing the cut. It's never okay to miss the cut. Never. It's going to happen, but it's never okay to settle for that. And I felt like we saw some people settle for that just to prove a point or just to show themselves. I think Tommy says that on live. Oftentimes when you're trying to prove a point to someone else, you're like, yeah, let me show myself how bad that is, kind of deal. And so I was a little disappointed and frustrated with that. I get it, but that sucked. That sucked to see.
Yeah, certainly. I didn't get to see a lot of that because most of the guys I was covering obviously were using
Well,
it, but
and I didn't get to see them. They weren't in the top
and
10, but just
that's what I was gonna say.
social or yeah, knowing it's
Sure.
just like, oh, dang.
Certainly. And I mean they have the right to say what they want about it and think what they want about it, and that's perfectly okay. I mean, there's really nothing we
Yeah.
can say, but it's one of those things where like in my mind, again, this is just my personal opinion, it's been around long enough to where there's no real excuse not to like understand that it's going to be a factor. You know what I mean? Like it'd be like let's just say again, and when I say this, like people will say, "Well, they're not comparable." They're not. But let's just say when the A rig came out, let's say Bass did allow you to throw the A rig, and for tournaments and tournaments and tournaments, like numbers of them, 5 in a row, how many ever it was, like people just caught them on an A rig. If by the sixth tournament you're not considering throwing an A rig just for the sake of competition, like you know,
What are we
that's
doing
crazy.
here? Yeah.
Like I'm not using, it's like from a sports aspect, like if bats are made now to be incredibly well made. The wood is harder, the ball travels further. I'm not going to use Babe Ruth's bat from 1900 whatever it may be just because that's the way it was. You know, I mean, like as a competitor, you want to do whatever it is that's going to make you competitive. Like at the end of the day, that's what you are. Like these all 103 of these guys, they're all competitors. So like if there's something that's going on that allows you to be more competitive, like at the end of the day, like that, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. Like, I mean, no athlete has ever like, that wanted to be competitive has never done less when there's more available, if that makes sense. So I mean, I don't know. That's the part I struggle with. And that's the thing. Like guys have made careers off of going against the grain and doing their thing. Like at the end of the day, like if you think doing your strength or what you want to do is good enough, then that's what you should do. Like that's 100% as an angler what you should do. You shouldn't just do something just because everybody else is doing it, but like also like when you have the technology and it's been pretty, evident for a good while now that it's a factor, you know, you have to kind of I don't know. I don't want to like be too specific because I don't want like not every instance is the exact same, but like to this point in time, we know how big of a factor it is. Like if you're just gonna go against the grain and not use it to prove a point, like that's
Yeah.
crazy. Like you have, as a pro angler, you have
Just
too
putting
much
your
invested
blinders
in it.
on for no reason.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you have too much invested in this sport to not try to do whatever it is that gives you the best chance to catch fish. So I mean, like that to me, I guess, is kind of the point that I would say, to the ones trying to prove a point. And I don't know how much of that there really is. I mean, again, guys have every right to say what they want and not be pleased with it. Like
Yeah, if
I'm
they're
not
paying entry
I don't
fees, you can
I
go
don't
fish
have
your tournament how you
100%.
want to do it.
I have literally zero, and I mean zero problem with guys being displeased with it. Like that's perfectly fine. Um, but again, just from the competitive standpoint, like there's been enough time of understanding how evident, you know, forward facing sonar is to where like, you get better at it or you don't. Like I mean it's
Yeah.
kind of
12
I don't
o'clock every day the train comes through. So at 11:55, don't be shocked when you start hearing a horn because it's on its way. It's something we
know.
expect to come into the year. I think I love basketball. I'm a basketball fan, and so uh it's the Tim Duncans of the world who were masters in the low post, turn around, 15-foot bank, knocked it in. Then there are some skill players, the shooting guards that are great at pull-up jumpers, two-pointers, whatever. Those players, if they didn't retire when they retired, would have to develop a three-point shot now. That's why you're seeing big men shoot three-pointers and try it, and you're like, you're 7 foot tall, go down there, because the value of a three-pointer and the pace of the game these days. It's so much more important than having, unless you're the absolute best in the low post, you're the absolute best 15-foot jump shot where it's 75% of the time it's going in. You're shooting 48% from 2 point and you're shooting 41% from 3 point. Why are you shooting two pointers anymore? You're almost as good as shooting them out there. Shoot more three pointers. And so this is what, if you're good at fishing a jig, but you're not the absolute best, you're going to have to add another wrinkle to your game. And, obviously, even going farther back, there's a reason James Naismith cut a hole in the bottom of the peach basket every time someone scored. As they got better at scoring, people stopped getting on ladders to retrieve the ball. We need to flow and move. And so also I always mention, like, stick and ball sports don't have many aspects of technology or
Sure,
advancements,
absolutely.
but the ball
Hard to
gets better, the bat gets better, your cleats get better. There's a reason Converse was huge in the 90s or 80s, and then no one wears them now because other shoes adapted and adjusted and changed. So we're just seeing that in our relatively young sport, and it is something that's so new. I mean, if I if I'm supportive of forward facing sonar, you'd think I was supportive of AI technology. Not at all. I do not. I hate Chat GPT. I hate AI. I do not like that. But I can understand how, forward facing sonar will help in certain things. Okay. Are you good with you want to
I'm good.
we're cool
I'm
with
good.
dropping that? We're dropping. Okay. Lake Fork. We talked about it a little bit. About 2.5 hours, 3 hours north of Toledo Bend. That's just probably because there's no great roads to get from Louisiana side of Toledo over there. It might be, it might be 120 miles, but it's 3 hours, so it's north. You've been around the Dallas region. The weather's been warm. These fish should start making a push. Like we said, we expect a shallow water push. And the one cause for concern this time of the year is when those fish make a shallow water push, is there cold weather or a cold front to stop them in their tracks or knock them back and make them swim back out there? I don't think that our cold, let me pull up Yantis, Texas on the weather real quick and see. I'll just read the forecast off. So, Yantis, Texas, it is cloudy today. Well, it went away and went back to Little Rock. Okay, Yantis, Texas. It is 72 today for a low, high of 80. And then tomorrow, which is the final day of practice, Wednesday, it is going to be dropping throughout the day. It's 70 at midnight, and then it'll be 50 by the time they wake up. So that is a dramatic drop. Huge winds on Wednesday from the north, 20 miles an hour, and then it settles out, and it's going to be 40s, for most of the day on Thursday, maybe some storms. Then it starts to pick back up and get up into the mid 70s, upper 70s throughout the rest of the tournament. So warming trend over the last 5 days, counting the end of Toledo, warming trend throughout those. And then boom, tomorrow it's going to be cold through day one. It'll rise back up throughout the day of day two and stay pretty warm for day three and day four. What say you on projections? Of course, Century Club, most definitely, whether they're shallow or deep, is definitely in the conversation. We've never not broken the Century Club there. But will we see some guys be able to compete up shallow with those forecasts?
I hope so. Certainly sitting here looking at the
Sounds good,
lake.
Kyle. Back to you. Back to you.
Yeah. I mean, I hope. I think that, yesterday specifically being Monday, like you said, I was closer to Dallas, but the weather was in the 90s. 90s. It was like 92 degrees. And here it was very similar. I mean, it was really, really warm. Um, Today it's been warm. Like you said, Thursday, the day of the tournament, like, the first day of the tournament is gonna be a little cooler, of course, but um I just be hard to it'd be hard for me to believe that there won't be a big push of fish go shallow. Shallow is relative too. I'm not saying that every fish is going to be on the bed spawning, but I just have to think that there's got to be a lot of ways to catch them fishing. And especially later in the tournament, similar to what we saw at Toledo Bend, as the water temperature rises, as the air temperature rises later in the tournament, like that could be another big factor. I mean, I think that it could certainly drive some of those fish shallow. Um, but at the same point, I mean, the way this lake sets up, there's almost always going to be fish off the bank. And I say always, it really is always fish going to be off the bank, to varying degrees. So my prediction is that we will see some guys really catch them good shallow, compared to even at Toledo Bend, just because of the sustained warm weather that we've had between Toledo Bend and now. The first day, I assume there'll be guys catch them shallow, but I think as the tournament goes on, we'll see even more guys be able to bring in big bags fishing, fishing the bank and fishing again, and even fishing shallow points, things that we've seen play here in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be fishing the bank, but just fishing shallow water.
And I wonder for, I don't know how dirty Fort gets on the bank when it's windy, but 20 miles an hour from the north for multiple hours tomorrow. I feel like if you weren't forward facing sonar offshore in the timber the last 2 days, you should have been, because tomorrow is going to be very difficult to be out there doing that. And so it may change some things. There'll probably be a lot of people on the bank tomorrow practicing up shallow if they haven't already. Um, and I think that you'll be able to see, like we said, fish feel pressure, whether that's fishing pressure or low and high pressure, barometric pressure, that kind of stuff, versus it was 90 and now it's 50. They don't feel the wind unless the wind churns up the water. They don't feel the top 2 or 3 feet of the water column for the most part. And so, yeah, it's going to affect the fishermen more than the fish probably. And we did just have a full moon, like you said. So if there was warm weather, full moon, those fish might have made that move. And then they're obviously going to be, possibly pushed back. with this weather. Kyle, you still there? I think we might have lost Kyle with his. I don't know if his computer died or not. I'm about to get a text from him, possibly. I got my guy back. His computer didn't die; he just lost connection, but he's checked in. All the reason to get inside of your room or a room at Fork earlier than you're probably supposed to. But let's get into our Fork picks. We had kind of, gone through our thoughts of the conditions. Let's get into some fantasy fishing before we pick our Fork picks. Do you have some people that you can give kudos to for winning the overall fantasy and drain the lake for Toledo Bend for Rapala Bassmaster fantasy fishing and for Falcon Rods drain the lake?
Yeah, absolutely. On the Rapala side, we had C. Giles 12. He won the overall prize for this tournament. And then Drain the Lake, I didn't look at that, but I've got TDU LAC 53, or excuse me, 350 won Drain the Lake. So I'm just looking over his roster right now. I imagine it had to be pretty stout.
That's my
Um,
burner account. I think that Matt Airy
yeah,
was that. I think I gave both of them love at the screen of knowledge, and I know on Drain the Lake, I think Matt Airy was T Duloc or whatever's worst person at 35th, but everyone else was in the top 20, I think.
correct. Yeah. 35th was the worst. And then he had, let's see, one, two, three,
I think he had four
four
in the
guys
top
in
10.
the top 10, and then the rest of the guys in the top 20. So that's pretty stout right there.
Yeah, and he didn't necessarily burn a bunch of people. And what was funny was C Giles 12 like basically picked all rookies and Fajita. and I which is crazy. Crazy that, obviously the technological, wave has hit us and the rookies and second year guys are good with it. That leads us to how we did. Let's pull back the curtain. We'll go behind the curtain a little bit, Kyle. How did you do in fantasy fishing and drain the lake? Because I did pretty good, and I don't want to go first because I want to rub it in a little bit if yours is worse.
Well, I mean, it's only making up for the two lousy years that you've had. So, I mean, one tournament would be a good step in the right direction for you. Um, I was at 83.5%, had 1,030 points. So, let's see. I had Walters, of course, was on my team. Then I had two more or less duds with a 59th and a 79th. But then to round it out, I had a 23rd and a 21st. So solid, but certainly could have been better.
Yeah, I was 95%, 1148. That's how many points I had at Toledo, and I think my only person who missed the cut was Brandon Lester, got 59th, I think. And then I also got I think everybody for me moved up on day 3 of this event. Like Hudnall was 85th, jumped into the top 50 in like 49th, and then moved up to 29th place. And Wesley Gore was in the top 10, dropped down to like 25th, jumped back up to 11th place. And then Cody Huff went from 6th down to 33rd and moved back up to 26th. Obviously, Walters being my anchor there in second place. Man, I that's a obviously low hanging fruit for Angler of the Year pick. That was who 5 of the 6 guys on Bass Live picked for Angler of the Year was Patrick Walters. He started out with a second place finish. Like, by golly, if he's not gonna stay in the top 10 maybe all year, normally he works his way up to it. But great sign for him. Drain the Lake. I was still in the 90s. I got 93%, 92.9 with 1606. I didn't really burn that many people in my opinion either. Felt like I had a good mix. Let me go to my Toledo roster. So I was 93%. I had Card, Mullins, Summerall, Cook, Walters, Watley, Cifuentes, and Gore. I hate that I burned Joey on a 65th. That sucked. Um, I burned Drew Cook on a 56th. That sucked. And then everybody else, it was all good. Summerall made the top 50. Mullins did as well. So did Brandon Card, Wesley Gore. I doubled up on him and Patrick Walters, and they both got top 11 finishes. So 1606 had 3 miss the cut, had 5 make the cut, and 1 make the final day.
Yeah, I was at 88.3%, similar in the sense that I had, a couple guys do really well. I had Pat Schlapper on my team, which was probably my most notable pick
What made
because
you
of
pick
his
him there?
lack of percentage for that event. Just getting to cover him last year at Seminole, and see what he was doing.
That's right.
Just was very, very Toledo Bend like, and it seemed like it would mesh well. I didn't have any insider information or anything. I just felt like that would be a good time to use Pat. And when I was looking at the schedule, there wasn't really another event that really stood out to me, larger than the others. To select him. So I did have the 103rd place finisher, which was a bit of a bummer. That definitely took the team in the wrong direction a little bit. But other than that, had a 15th, 29th, 3rd, 5th, in Ben Milliken, and then 38th. Let's see, and then obviously a 103rd, and then Keith Combs also didn't have a great event either. So two, pretty bad finishes, and then the rest of the guys in the top 30. So pretty solid.
And you're still right behind, relative percentage wise, just 4% behind with having a two terrible finishes. Let's get into our fantasy fishing for Lake Fork. The 5 buckets are now set based on Angler of the Year strictly. So you've got bucket A as the top 20 in AOY, bucket B top 20, bucket C top 20. Sorry, 20, and then it's 21 through 40, 41 through 60. And then Kyle, do we know if bucket E has 23 guys? Is that how we dispersed it? 1, 2, 3, 4,
Now
5,
it has
6.
more guys than the first 4 buckets than you're saying, and then less guys in bucket E. That's typically the way it's worked in the
Oh,
past.
okay. So it'll probably be bucket A is 21 guys, bucket B is 21, bucket C is 21, and then it's 20 and 20. Um, so let's jump right into it. I'll give you my A, B, C, D, E, and then um, you can give me your 5, and then we'll go through each bucket and why we picked each guy. I've got Justin Hamner, JT Tompkins, Lee Livesey, Scott Martin, and Jacob Porosnik. What say you?
So I have Patrick Walters again in bucket A, bucket B, Cody Huff, bucket C, Lee Livesey, bucket D, Clifford Perch, and bucket E, Kyle Welcher.
So for bucket A, we're along the same lines here. I mixed it up to just be a little bit more diverse, but Justin Hamner and Patrick Walters are like the same dude. They're roommates or camping buddies. They park beside each other probably if they're camping. And Hamner is great with his forward-facing sonar, using a jerk bait, using things like that. Can also catch him shallow. We got to see him with a big old mop jig. He was still using forward-facing sonar, but somehow that doesn't matter if you're using a jig. People forget that you're doing that. And so he got all kinds of kudos and love, even though it's, whatever. So he's my bucket A pick for the same reasons you probably picked Patrick Walters in bucket A.
Yeah, Patrick Walters. I mean, when you talk about um, fishing style, obviously going to be similar enough to Toledo Bend in a lot of ways. But then when you look at the history, I mean, obviously a win, let's see, a win, I want to say a second place finish, and then,
Yeah.
top 14, I want to say, pretty solid, odds that he's going to do well again. And I said this the last time we were on, but last year it seemed like every tournament, at the end of the event, I would regret not picking Welcher or Cobb. Like it just seemed like I always felt like the time I picked one of those two guys, they were going to have their dud of the season, and it never happened. And to your credit earlier, with Patrick Walters being almost the front runner by most to win Angler of the Year, I just don't want to be left behind on that train. I think I'm just going to pick Patrick Walters until he proves me wrong, which I don't really foresee happening, but that I just don't want to look back at the end of the tournament and be like, well, Patrick Walters was a really easy pick I could have picked, but I'm gonna play it safe in bucket A with Walters.
I like that. When you're looking at the percentages, 59% are consumed with 2 guys. Ben Milliken at 34.5 and Patrick Walters at 24 and change. So 50, 59%. Chris Aldane's got 7% and Kyoyo Fujita's got 13.5% for bucket A. Anybody under the radar that you considered picking if you didn't ride this Walters train?
anytime you come to Fork, you're obviously considering the fact that big baits will play to varying degrees, and big, given the time of the year for this event and the warming trend and everything, um, you can't overlook a guy like Chris Zaldain. I mean, it's not like that's a under the radar pick in a lot of ways, being a Texan and having success here. But I want to say he was only at like 5% or 4.5%. I mean,
Seven,
pretty
yeah.
low. Yeah, okay, pretty low either way. To pick Zaldain at Fork, so. Um, this could be the time. Obviously, we always keep an eye on it that, big baits will play for all 4 days. So if that's the case, then, a guy like Chris Zaldain and Bucket A could be a really good pick for pretty low percentage considering, his history of success and history fishing the lake.
I feel like we now have, in past years, you avoid rookies. You don't need to pick a rookie, but I feel like we know from the opens how good these rookies are. And then they showed up in week one. And so, bucket B, I'm going with JT Tompkins. I mentioned him, obviously, going down my list. There's not really too many people with huge percentages. Taku Ito has 19%, Brandon Card has 10%, but everybody else is in single digit percentage. JTB and 8% is like the third or fourth most picked angler in bucket B. But I think that JT will do well at Toledo. He didn't do bad, obviously, he didn't do bad at Toledo. I think he'll do well at Fork.
Yeah, I went with the young guy as well. Not a rookie, of course, but comparatively doesn't seem that young because he's been around for a handful of years, but still a young dude is Cody Huff. So I would say that would be more of a forward-facing sonar pick if I had to say. But had a decent finish here. And I just think stylistically, like pre-spawn, standing timber, all the things that you look at this event and think, these are all things that Cody Huffer, is good at doing, used to doing on Bull Shoals and Table Rock and places that he's had success in the past. So at a fairly low player percentage, I want to say, let's see, 4.7 player percent. I'm going with Cody Huff, also going with the young gun.
Well, when we talk about bucket C and the percentages, it's really the percentage, and it's 69% for Lee Livesey. I've been burned by him in the past by trying to be too cute with it and picking somebody else. I'm just going to assume he's going to get a top 10, top 15, and I'm going to just ride with that percentage, even though it isn't gaudy 69%.
Yeah, same here. I think that I want to say you'd be crazy not to do it, but you did do that, I guess, 2 years ago. So, and learned your lesson, rightfully so. So, the one thing I will say in bucket C is Polinick in a small sample size has done extremely well here at Fork. So, if you wanted to take a risk, it's not like 11% is a huge risk, but compared to almost 70%, anything is a solid chance. So, who knows? It's one of those things where being here earlier in the year, you're not exactly sure how that will help or hurt Lee, but I mean, it seems like at this point he's proved way too much on this lake, tournaments and not fishing tournaments to go against him.
Yeah, he was telling me on the phone when I talked to him before the season started that this time of the year it's not really spot oriented. It's region, it's area. So pulling up to that one cast spot type deal may not be the gig, but rather just getting in that good area. So we'll keep an eye on that. I did consider Kenta Kamira 1.9%, and I was really like, I think Kenta's gonna freaking crush it this week. So just for the people on the podcast that have listened this far, if Kenta crushes it, just know that I really wanted to pick him, but I'm peer pressured into picking Lee Livesey for the right reasons. Bucket D, I'm going with Scott Martin. Man, mixing in, you know, some offshore forward facing sonar or getting up on the bank or fishing shallow. I think that he could be someone who does a little bit of both, maybe. I saw how effective his perspective mode was in Florida in shallower water. Fork is tremendously shallower than Toledo is. So I feel like that could come into play a little bit more than it would have at Toledo, just based on the situation. Obviously traditional live scope, forward facing sonar angle is going to be good at Toledo and deeper places. Perspective is great at shallower places. I could see with Scott fishing in Florida, having it tuned to those depths and knowing what he's looking at could be a deal here. And really under the radar for that bucket. 27% for Joey, 17% for Jason Christie, got 14% for Gerald Swindle. And then even Seth Fighter at 7.5% is trailing behind those guys as the fourth most picked. And Scott would be, I think, the fifth most picked. So 4.5%. I didn't pick him because of the percentage. I literally thought, other than Lee Livesey and Justin Hamner / Patrick Walters, I felt really good about Scott Martin. And so I had already picked him, even though I didn't know what bucket he was in. And then finding him in bucket D, I was like, yeah, I feel good about that.
Yeah, for sure. It certainly doesn't help to have him at a lower player percentage than you're, normally seeing him at. I'm going with Clifford Perch. So a couple of different reasons. One being obviously back to the big bait discussion, is extremely good with the big bait, but it seems like every year Clifford Perch has a tournament where like all of a sudden you look at Bass Track and he like caught a 12 pounder or some just the most random thing ever, and it propels him to have a good event. Fork is obviously
Might not be so random at Fork, yeah.
yeah, right. Well, Fork is so full of big fish, and two trains of thought. Let's say um, some fish do start pulling up to spawn, and that actually does play a factor. Not saying it will or won't, but if it does, is obviously one of the better, bed fishermen in the elites. So, a guy like that could obviously have success doing that. But also throwing a big glide bait or just a swim bait in general, um, at a place like Fork, we've seen how successful you can be doing that if you lock it in your hands. So at a super, super low player percentage, I think it was 0.5. Yeah, still 0.5. So I'm taking a risk in bucket D. That's 2 weeks in a row, or two tournaments in a row, rather. Bucket D has been the bucket to go with the super low percentage. Last week it didn't work out for me super well, but I've got better feelings about this one.
Now we go to the last bucket, bucket E. If it goes shallow, which I feel like it could, there's a lot of really good guys in this bucket. Really good guys. I mean, you got Brandon Cobb at 29%. You've got Greg Hackney at 19%. Since when? Kyle Welcher at 24%. Since when is Greg Hackney ever going to be the third most picked person? And he's in bucket E. If he's in
Bucket E.
bucket E, it's 92% you're picking Greg Hackney. But the fact that you have Angler of the Year and the Angler of the Year runner up in bucket E has him as the third most picked person. I'm going with another really good shallow guy that used to be roommates with Greg Hackney that has won Elite Series events in this region, Jacob Porosnik. I think that this one is one that Jacob Porosnik can win, or at least get a top 20, get a top 15, something like that. So amongst all of the high percentage picks that are at the top of their game, Welcher, Cobb, Hackney, I'm picking Jacob Porosnik, who kind of slides under the radar these days.
Yeah, so I pretty much just decided as soon as I looked at the bucket, the way the percentages were split up, that I was gonna probably go with Cobb, Hackney, or Welcher. Just feeling like it's a safer pick in a way, but I went with Kyle Welcher. So I just feel like after the season he had last year, he did say something that scared me, I guess, a little bit, is the fact that last year he attributed a lot of his success to back-to-back events. Because he'd have a good one at the first one and then a good one at the second one. Like he'd feel like he could, consistently throw nearly the same stuff, and it just worked out in his favor. Well, I hope it's not the exact same thing on the negative end of the spectrum, to where he had obviously one of his worst events there at Toledo Bend last week. I hope that he turns it around, but a lot of different things. Like you said, obviously, if the shallow bite turns on, Kyle is as good as anybody doing that. Good bed fisherman if that, ends up being a deal at all. But obviously, we've seen that he can be successful, fishing off
Spinnerbait
the
and
bank.
chatterbait and whatever. Yeah.
Certainly. So I'm going with Welcher. I like him to bounce back. Obviously, you know, choose wisely, because all these guys in bucket E that you mentioned, you're not going to get a chance to pick them in bucket E probably again, or if again, maybe one other time. So take advantage of that while you can.
Mike Iaconelli's in this bucket. Buddy Gross is in this bucket. I'll mention Buddy, in a short while. Rick Clun, John Cruz, David Gaston, a lot of really good anglers. Chad Pipkins, maybe he'll catch another personal best at Fork like we did before. All right. I'm going to go over my five again. Justin Hamner, bucket A. JT Tompkins, bucket B. Lee Livesey, bucket C. Scott Martin in bucket D. And Jacob Prosnick in bucket E. I've got I'm not quite sure why, but I just threw out 116 pounds, 10 ounces. I just threw out bigger than we've seen it before at Fork. That's what I expect. Whatever the highest we've seen, which is 114 from Brandon Cobb, I think we're going to see a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I had 110. So I mean pretty similar.
You're
I could
normally on the pessimistic side. What'd you have for Toledo?
98 something. So
Ooh.
I was actually pretty close. Obviously it went to 100. I typically don't pick my winning weight at 100 because it seems like we've been burned by that too many times, thinking that it would be a 100-pound tournament and then ends up being significantly less. So I usually go a little lower, but yeah, I think it'll take over 100 pounds. I'd say that it's so hard to predict, but if I had to guess, I mean, I'm thinking at least half the top 10 will be over 100 pounds. I think it could be that good, especially with more stable weather that's coming later in the week. I think that the guys that are able to ride the weather should be able to be pretty consistent.
I think that we'll have a good day one weight wise, a tough day two weight wise, and then a huge day three and day four. Like, even though the weather gets better on day two, I feel like they're going to ride the good weather from practice, catch them big time day one. And then day two, you expect, oh, it's going to be even better. And then it's a little bit of a setback. And then day three and day four are huge. Um, do we ever see the all-time weight record from Falcon broken, 132? Are we gonna see that ever? Like, there's very few places that could ever do that, and Fork would be one of them.
Yeah, it
But
certainly
Fork is
would.
just so small, and it's not adjacent to Mexico, where like there's no pleasure boaters at Lake, at Falcon.
There's plenty of fishing pressure here is the problem. I mean, for how small of a lake it is, every time that the elites have been here, other than maybe the November tournament in 2020, there are plenty of locals fishing. And that's fine, but on a lake that's as small as Lake Fork is, you notice it a lot quicker. I mean, you get in a certain area where guys are catching them and having a lot of success, and they're never the only guys in there. There's almost always some locals in there as well. So, I would say no. I don't know. I mean, eventually it's bound to happen. I'd say whether it's while we're still kicking or not, but I'm sure it'll happen. But I'm gonna say definitely not this event. I just don't feel like I've seen way too many trucks and boats hauling around that don't have wraps on them to think that anybody's gonna have that consistently big bags.
No, and I don't think so either. And I'm the guy who always goes with some exorbitant weight, 192 pounds or something. But I just figured I'd ask you that. So give me your five guys once again, and we'll move to Drain the Lake.
Yeah, let me pull it back up here. So I've got Patrick Walters, bucket A, Cody Huff, bucket B, Lee Livesey, bucket C, Clifford Perch, bucket D, and Kyle Welcher in bucket E.
Nice, nice. Now for Drain the Lake. Uh, Falcon rods drain the lake. The anglers we used in the first event, we cannot use anymore. They are done. So Brandon Card, David Mullins, Caleb Summerall, Drew Cook, Patrick Walters, Brad Watley, Joey Cifuentes, and Wesley Gore are all done for me. And so I'll give you my first four that I'm going to use. I've got one crossover from my 5-man Rapala team to my 8-man Falcon Rods Drain the Lake team. So Livesey, Buddy Gross, Hank Cherry, and Ben Milliken. And remember, I set all of my Drain the Lake stuff before the season started. So I'm not trying to oh, I didn't use Milliken at Toledo and he did well, I should use him here. No, I skipped him on Toledo for a reason because it was going to be different than it was April of last year. I just didn't know that he was going to also, get a top 5 in February of this year. So I moved him to Fork when my preseason predictions. So Livesey, Buddy Gross, Hank Cherry, and Ben Milliken are my first four. Who are your first four?
So I also have some crossover. I have two guys that I cross over from Rapala to Falcon Drain the Lake, but Lee Livesey, Chris Zaldane, Cody Huff, and Brandon Card are my first four.
Say that again. Chris Zaldane, Cody Huff.
And Brandon Card.
And who's the fourth one? Lee Livesey.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Um, I also have Chris Zaldane in my second four. I've got Chris Zaldane, John Sokup, John Cruz, and Jacob Fouts.
Okay, so my second half is going to be Frank Talley, Mark Frazier, Brandon Lester, and JT Tompkins.
Ooh, okay. So to go over our lists again, I've got Livesey, Gross, Cherry, Milliken, Zaldane, Sokup, Cruz, and Fouts. Livesey, don't have to explain why. Buddy Gross, I'm purely going off of trends, and he has won the second Elite Series event every other year. It's only a 2 tournament sample, but he wins Eufaula, Alabama, his second Elite Series event, and then next year he doesn't win one, and then the next year he wins Harris Chain, the second Elite Series event. He didn't win one last year. He might, if he has a chance to win it, it's going to be this one. It's the trend. Also, offshore or shallow, I feel like Buddy could set up much better here. I think we're going to see a lot of bait casters compared to spinning rods. Even if forward facing's in there, I think it's just going to be like maybe it's swim baits, maybe it's jerk baits, maybe it's something like lipless, something like that. Hank Cherry, Ben Milliken, big baits for Milliken. That's one reason why I was picking him here. Hank Cherry, I think it's that pre-spawn push to shallow or finding them with a jerk bait in between. I think I remember Hank had a video he posted where like he didn't catch them and lost them in the fork event and stayed after like for a few days, just catching fish and learning to land them in timber, on treble hooks, things like that. So I think that that's good. That's good for athletes to do that with their craft. Zaldane, big baits wise as well. We've seen him on Bass Live have success up shallow with big baits or off the bank. Sokup, a great live scoper, got off to a good start to his elite season this year compared to last year tremendously. John Cruz, it seems like when he does excel, it's early in the year. And yes, he's won 2 Elite Series events. Both of those were title fisheries, so it doesn't apply here. But they're both kickoffs to the season, early events. He's done well in classics that were cold classics, early pre-spawn, type events. So I'll put Cruz slotted here because I know Cruz is going to be a heavy pick at St. John's for Drain the Lake later in the year for a lot of people. And I don't think it's going to be the same as when he won 2 years ago in 2022. So I'm picking him here because I think a lot of people pick him there. And then Jacob Fouts, hey, great start for him. You got to check. He's had a tumultuous offseason a little bit. He's been more in the spotlight than he's ever been, but he did get a check at Toledo, and I think that he'll keep that rolling in Texas here at Lake Fork and either do the same thing or he could slightly mix it up in the timber and catch him this week as well.
Sure. So to go over my 8 again, I have Lee Livesey, Chris Zaldane, Cody Huff, Brandon Card, Frank Talley, Mark Frazier, Brandon Lester, and JT Tompkins. Obviously, a lot of the same logic that you had for a handful of those guys, but Cody Huff, again, going back to being able to catch those pre-spawners and something that he has consistently been able to do, utilizing those electronics. Brandon Card's had a good history here. He's a guy that seemingly, despite being, more of a veteran in the field, has really grasped on to the concept of forward-facing sonar and has done well with it. Obviously, I think, again, just his history here, it seemed like the one event I would want to go with Card. And then, Mark Frazier having a good event here, Brandon Lester needing a good event here. I think, seems like he's going to bounce back at some point. And Fork would be as good of a place as any to do it. And then JT Tompkins for the same reason that you had him in Rapala. So that's my 8-man roster.
Lester's puzzling to me because he always does well, gets off to a good start. And last year he just didn't get off to a great start. Like he had, I guess, an okay Okeechobee, terrible Seminole, and then just like had a good classic and then just never got going again. So hopefully Brandon Lester makes a return. He made every check in 2022 and just made a handful last year and didn't make the classic, like just shocker. So I expect Lester to bounce back as well at some point. So I picked him in Rapala last week. Obviously, I could pick him again. I haven't used him in Drain the Lake yet. So we'll see about Lester. But yeah, interesting dynamics here at Lake Fork, whether it's forward-facing sonar, Century Club, finesse tactics, the push shallow, the weather that we're going to have, or how small and pressured this body of water is. It's going to be a fun Elite Series event. Make sure you tune in there. Set your lineups. I know you're listening to this podcast Tuesday evening / Wednesday morning. Make sure you do it because today is the last day to do it before it locks Thursday morning. Don't be the guy that says, I'm going to sleep on it and I'll set the lineup before they start because they always take off earlier than you think. and it'll be locked. We don't pull a Lisa Talmadge, our tournament director, who set her lineup when AT&T decided to go down and it didn't save. Don't do that. Don't do that. I love you, Lisa. I was just had to rag on you there for dropping like a 0 in the first event, I think. All right, Kyle. Have fun at Fork, man. Hope you take some stellar photos, and I hope we have a great live show. For those who have stayed here in the show this long, I'll give you that's the bonus. We need to do that every preview show. Stay for the last 5 minutes if you want to hear who's on Bass Live later in the week. But we will have Lee Livesey on live. We should have Lee Livesey for being the local favorite, Kiyoya Fujita for being the Angler of the Year leader, and then we've got a mixture of Chris Zaldane, John Cox, Drew Benton, and Brock Mosley. So we got some elite winners, some shallow water hammers, because honestly, Kyle, I don't know if we're going to see shallow water. So that's our best guess is day one. But no, it should be good. We should probably have a couple units plugged in. We'll be able to show some of their offshore stuff if they decide to do it. But that's still a work in progress as we get through each week. But excited to have the second stop back-to-back weeks at Lake Fork. And after Sunday, Kyle, we'll be basically a quarter of the way through the elite schedule.
Yeah, it's weird to think about it that way, considering we just started. But yeah, it should be a good event. Obviously, Fork's always a lot of fun just because of the giant fish that get caught each and every day. So it's super fun to cover this event for that reason, because you never know when a 10-pounder is going to happen. It seems like it happens about every time we're here. So I know we said that Toledo Bend never had an actual 10-pounder, but I'd be willing to bet we probably see at least one here at Lake Fork.
We need to see
I'll be
some.
really, really, really surprised.
Because we won't be able to see them brought in with the limit. It needs to be a 9 or 10-pounder. I think somebody it was craziest thing. I think it was postponed, but I think there was like a 6.5 brought in one day, and then Pipkin's 9-pounder was pre-spawn and wasn't brought in because it was too short. But there was a 6.5 post-spawn that was long enough. So hopefully within the slot limit or above it, hopefully the big ones get brought in above it. All right, Kyle. I will see you after Fork, but good luck.